Welcome to this episode of Dialogue with Dylan. This one is a bit more casual. I had a conversation with my friend James, and we talked about his experience being a Christian, skepticism, the difference between being atheist and agnostic, controversial biblical teachings, and more. Remember, honesty, empathy, and civility. That's my goal here. Hope you enjoy it. We've talked, not really extensively, but we've had a bit of a back and forth about Christianity and religion, and I'm just curious to get your take on a few aspects of Christianity, because you've released some videos and commentary and on different stories in the Bible, and I can sense your passion and everything as well. So could you give us a bit of a background about like your testimony, or like the way that your worldview or beliefs transformed before you became a Christian and after?
Yeah, sure. I'd love to share on that. So I grew up pretty much hating church, hating religion. Um, I thought church was really like boring. I didn't understand really what people were talking about, especially the preachers. I thought, but man, that preacher sounds pretty angry. That preacher sounds like he's about to die. He's like really old. I can't even follow him. Like I had all these thoughts. I was pretty immature too. So I would go to church and I'd make fun of people. It's weird because I'm a Christian now, but when I wasn't a Christian, I thought Christians were like really weird. I thought they were pretty. I viewed them as like closed-minded. I viewed Christians as judgmental. I viewed them as naive, even. Um, I viewed them as just like, you know, religious like zealots. Really, I was very strongly, I think, opposed to Christianity for most of my life until I was about 18. And when I was 18, I had a few experiences in college that really challenged my worldview, and really hard things. Um, like life hits you sometimes when you least expect it, and when you fall down, you get to thinking about what's really important, right? Um, and there were always questions in the back of my mind of I always thought about, okay, who am I? Like, what am I here on earth for? Like, I kind of always in the back of my mind was afraid of like death. Like I was afraid of like, oh, what's gonna happen to me like after I die? That was something that I was especially when I was like a young kid, like 9 years old even. I was terrified of like dying, because I didn't know what it was like before I was born. I don't know what it's like, what it's gonna be like after I'm dead.
Mhm.
That scared me. But when I was in college, was really when my life changed like pretty drastically. I would say the beginning of college and near the end of high school, I was pretty into partying and drugs and sex, and um, you know, just really, you know, the church would say that that's a very worldly lifestyle. They'd use that
Mhm.
term, or they would say that's very secular.
Yeah.
Um, and I was what the church would call lost, or I was what the church would refer to as a sinner. Um, and I put these quotation marks because um, in the world, I guess we don't really use those terms very much. Um, Actually, from the world's perspective, like it's the church people who are weird, but from the church perspective, sometimes it's the people in the world that are weird, and there's this disconnect. Um, that's a different topic.
Mhm.
When I was in college, I had these these experiences like with like these spiritual experiences um, that I never had before, where I would encounter, right? I would encounter like God, and I would hear the voice of God, and it was like terrifying. It was terrifying when it first happened because I'd never heard the actual voice of God. Like I didn't know I thought people who said, "Oh yeah, God told me to do this," or "God told me to say this," I thought they were either lying or crazy. And then it happened to me, and then I said, "Whoa, that's weird." Like I was terrified. I actually didn't want to even tell anyone that this was
Hmm.
happening. Um, and over time, I realized like, oh, this is actually like good, and I began, you know, discovering Jesus, right? I began searching to find out who Jesus really is. I had this understanding, right, that Christianity was all about Jesus, that Jesus, the man, was one of them. It was arguably one of the most influential figures in the history of humankind, right? That was something that I always knew that, but I didn't really know Jesus. I thought, oh, Jesus is a good teacher. He was a good person. He was a nice guy, and then a bunch of people hated him and they killed him. Like, like that's what I thought. I thought,
Hmm.
yeah, I guess people hate everybody, right? So that's why he died. That was kind of my understanding. It was very superficial, um, and what's really funny is that from afar, Jesus looks great. Oh yeah, yeah, I have no problems with Jesus. Like, I mean, I from far away, rarely would people say anything bad about Jesus. It's when you get close up to him, when you really dive deep and dig in to see who this character, who this person really, really was and still is. Um, then you know your perspective starts to change. Then you're challenged in your beliefs, in your mindsets about God and about life. And so yeah, in just to wrap it up because I feel like I'm rambling a little bit.
Hmm.
Just that you know I had an encounter with Jesus. Like Jesus is real. I'm gonna come out and say it. Like Jesus is real, and um, my life got changed from that experience.
And so you said that you grew up in the church or in a religious family, and were you secretly like atheist, or you didn't take it seriously, and then you had this epiphany, or so is that accurate?
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, my parents would take me to church when I was really young, through middle school, I think. But and I loved when I was really young. I loved hearing like Sunday school, like the Old Testament Bible stories. I thought they were fantastical. Like Noah's
Hmm.
Ark, or you know, David slaying Goliath, or Samson and Delilah. All these stories. I thought they were fascinating. I mean, I had a really good Sunday school teacher his name was Pastor T. He was this old bald guy, and he was really funny. So I really I enjoyed that. But in middle school and in high school, I was probably agnostic. So I
Hmm.
thought, well, I don't know if there's a God, and if there is a God, well, I'll never know. I'll never know. I'll never know for sure if there is a God. Like, how can anyone know for sure anything, right? Like, what do you really even know to be true, right? I kind of had that attitude of,
Do you think that there's sort of this misunderstanding between atheist and agnostic? Because I think people will often confuse those. They'll say that, atheists don't believe in God, agnostics don't believe in God, which I think you could say is true, but there is a distinction to be made, right? Like atheists, they reject the belief because of a lack of evidence or something, but agnostics would be open to the idea, or they say a higher power might be plausible, but I'm not sure. Like, do you think that that's a correct way of putting that, and do you think that there's a misunderstanding?
So I think, yeah, I think you pretty much hit it on the nail. Um, I think yeah, the for the most part, what I've seen in my experience is that people who say they're atheist and they're adamant atheists, right?
Hmm.
These people, they're very skeptical. They're very uh, they they're very firm in saying, yeah, I don't believe in God. I believe there's no God. And they have the reasons, right? They'll tell you all the reasons why they think that there's no God. And usually, and I it breaks my heart really when I have conversations with atheists about their atheism, because like more often than not I find that they're very depressed and very miserable. Um,
Hmm.
but yeah, there I would say there's a distinction between atheism and agnostics. Agnostics are people who usually they either didn't grow up in religion, they didn't, or they're sometimes they're very scientific, right? My dad's actually agnostic, and agnostics say, well, I'm just gonna live my life the way I think is right. I'm gonna do what's right. I'm gonna follow my conscience, the moral code. I'm gonna follow the law, right? But really, God is like more of a gray area. There could be gods, there could be a God. Who really knows for sure? Did anyone come down and say, "Oh, I'm God, like worship me"? Did anyone that's kind of the agnostic attitude.
And I suppose you said that, from your experience, that atheists tend to be depressed, or I don't know if you could also say, I mean, there maybe there's nothing grounding them, I guess, and that's the reason why they're depressed. And so there's people like Sam Harris, for example, who's an atheist. He wrote a book called Letter to a Christian Nation about essentially why he's not a Christian, and why it's like, belief in religion is like potentially like dangerous, I guess, for people to believe in. And but something that's interesting about him is, and there's actually an interview where he spoke at a church with a pastor about this, and he said that he believes that while he doesn't believe in God, he still thinks that spirituality and meditation are very important, and he's trying to seek ways to disconnect that sort of experience from religion. And so do you think that's possible to sort of achieve that mental state where you sort of have that thing that grounds you in the universe, while at the same time it doesn't require adherence to a particular religion?
Oh, that's a really good question. So, all right, that there's a lot to unpack there. So, there are two approaches that a person can have, right? When deciding what they're going to believe about life and death and God and spirituality and religion. There are two approaches. The first approach is confirmation bias. It's I already believe what I believe, and I'm just going to look for information to support what I already believe. That's the first approach. And they're going
Hmm.
to develop long, lengthy, persuasive arguments to really make sure this is what I believe and why I believe it. That's the first approach. The second approach is asking this question. The question is not, is it pleasant, right? The question is it true? Um, and so, like you said, I mean, there are thousands of world religions, and
Hmm.
there's so many there. And each one of these religions, right? They say this is a way. This is a way of life. This is what we think is true. This is a truth of life. Um, that's kind of the claim. This is a way of life, right?
Hmm.
Um, Meditation, spirituality. This is a way. to ground yourself. This is a way to have inner peace, right? This is a way to grow as a person, right? Now, so for me, what sets Christianity apart from any other religion is what Jesus said in John 14 verse 6. John chapter 14 verse 6, where he says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. And so, right, he didn't say I am a way. Right? He said I am the way. He's right. In essence saying the true way of life is through me. It's a claim of exclusivity. He's saying, in effect, the only way to come to God is through me. And so for me, I listen. I study meditation. I study forms of Eastern meditations. I've studied Buddhism. I've studied Hinduism. All right. I've studied these different types of spirituality, like New Age spirituality, law of attraction. Right. I've studied those, and I found like it's a way. This is a way to live your life. This is a path to enlightenment. But when I look at Jesus, I see something totally different, where he goes, no, this is the way. Like any other way is the wrong way. Right? So, yeah, does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, it does. And I was going to follow up, and, I previously had Mike on, and I sort of asked him about, could you differentiate Christianity from all of the other world religions? And I believe there's, obviously he was basing it on the book Mere Christianity, and essentially C.S. Lewis breaks down the 5 major religions, and there's that funnel that you go through. The first is you have to establish, okay, we can all believe that we adhere to a greater objective morality. Then after that, it's like, all right, now you're presented with 5 options, like, and which are you going to choose to believe in? And then he details that. So I think that offers some more insight into that as well. So I think that was a perfect synopsis of that. And also, the spirituality kind of being separate from religion is, I think, very, very interesting. And I also really enjoyed what you had to say about that. When we were speaking earlier, we talked about sort of controversial teachings that are found within the Bible that tend to veer skeptical people away, because obviously, our social standards have evolved quite a lot. Now, the trend is that, we need to be as inclusive and tolerant as possible to everyone, regardless of their superficial characteristics. And I think anyone, any reasonable person can get behind that. But then, and another point that Sam Harris made in that one book, Letter to a Christian Nation, was about, there are a lot of things like within the 10 Commandments, like, rape is left out, torture is left out. There are instances where like slavery is encouraged, and like homosexuality is condemned, and and of course many Christians will also oppose abortion and things like that. So I'm curious if you had someone who approached you, and I said, and I know that you said that apologetics is not necessarily your strong suit, but if we had to sort of approach this from like a macro level, what do you think your response would be to someone who is interpreting the Bible very strictly and saying, like, if someone like commits this sin, then that is just, it's evil, and therefore Christianity can't get behind it. I'm curious what your thoughts on all of that. I know that's not really one clear question, but I don't know anything that's there. Go ahead.
Those are really important topics. I mean, they're people who have these questions, who have these tough questions, and they're people with these questions who are really genuine with their concerns, right? People who will read the scripture, like in the Old Testament, and they'll go, ugh, like God just destroyed like a whole group of people. He just killed them all. Like, why would I want to follow a God like that? Like, how
Mm-hmm.
is a God like that even good, right? Or this God condones slavery? Like, I don't want to follow a God like that. And then you have other people who do oppose Christianity because they hate it, right? They're you could call them like deconstructionists, or where they read the Bible through this really critical and hyper analytical lens to in order to somehow debunk the entire Bible. Like, we're gonna debunk this thing. We're gonna
Right.
debunk this worldview right here, right now, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
and then you see things happening right in the current day. You have the Pope, right, who comes out and he is, for some reason, we say the Pope is the spokesperson for the church, right? They're the Catholic Church, uh, and he comes out and he says, you know, homosexuality is not a sin, and we welcome people who are in the LGBTQ community. Um, but then you have other Christians who say, "Oh, no, homosexuality is a sin. It's very clear in Leviticus." They quote Leviticus. They quote, Paul in the New Testament. The Apostle Paul say, "No, homosexuality is a sin, and we're going to stand by it." Right? And then you even have like the Methodist Church, right? And the Methodist Church is like splitting over this one issue. There's like this huge division happening, and the truth is, wherever there is sin, there is division. And so, kind of, what I think the heart of this question, or this statement really is like, okay, where can we really agree, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, what can we really agree on? Because, right, if the gospel is true, if the gospel that Jesus preached is true, then shouldn't all of his followers be united, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's seemingly there's a lot of hypocrisy. Seemingly, Christians sit around and they split hairs over theological and doctrinal nuances. Um, Christians, right? They're hateful, judgmental, condemning, right? They seem to be able to do is condemn sin. But when you look at Jesus and the gospel he preached a message of love and forgiveness, and kindness and grace, right? So what's going on, right?
Mm-hmm.
And how is it that uh, you know how is it that this God of the Bible, this God of the Old Testament, who all throughout the Old Testament he's pouring out wrath. He's a judge, right? Um he is strong and mighty. And so, how do we kind of reconcile all these different moving parts? Because it's a really complicated. It's super super complicated, right? When you
Yeah.
when you and this is why I said earlier, I don't like talking about religion. I really don't like it. Like, my whole life I've hated religion, and when I became a Christian, I hated it even more, and I still hate talking about it. I I don't like it because you can never be right. Okay? There's always another point of view. there's always another opinion. There's always more depth to what you're talking about. There's always more understanding, more wisdom you could have, right? And so there's always more knowledge that you don't have. Um, and so when it comes down to the gospel, when it comes down to Jesus, this is why I love Jesus, because Jesus makes it simple. He makes it really simple, right? And and he just he gets to the heart of the matter. He gets to the core of the matter. Um, and and so while religion in the Bible is very vast, there's so many intricacies, and it's beautiful, right? It's a beautiful um, theology is amazing. I love doctrine. I love theology. It's amazing. When you study these subjects, I believe it expands your mind because you think these new thoughts that you've never thought before.
Right.
But what I would say to anybody listening who is a skeptic, is a doubter, is really put off by the hypocrisy they've seen in the church, or people who have been even hurt by like church abuse, um, people who have interpreted the scriptures incorrectly, and instead of using the word of God as a way to bring life, they've instead used it as a weapon to beat people up. Basically, I've seen this so many times where people have used the scriptures and twisted them and used them to beat people over the head and oppress people instead of liberate them. And so, what I would say to anyone in that category is don't throw out the baby with the bathwater, right? Because when you get into learning about Jesus, you realize that it's messy. Like it was a wreck. Okay, like when you look at the people Jesus associated with, he associated with sinners, tax collectors. He associated with lepers, the mentally ill. He associated with the poor, the hungry, the blind, the lame, the deaf, right? He actually associated with demon possessed people. He regularly cast out demons. Um, he associated with promiscuous women. That's like something that we know about Jesus. And
The adulterous, right?
right, like
Yeah.
the woman caught in adultery, or
Hmm.
the woman by the well who had been divorced 5 different times. Right, he
Right.
associated with these women, um, and and so when you really look at the life of Jesus, you see that Jesus surrounded himself with imperfect people who were deeply flawed, who didn't have all the answers, whose lives were in shambles, and Jesus breaks in on the scene, and everyone loves him. They all love him, like these sinners, right? Quote unquote sinners. These human beings. They love him, and and Jesus becomes this really popular figure of his day, and and I really want to say this because uh, I think it's important to note, especially when we talk about religion, is that the people who had the biggest problems with Jesus were the religious leaders.
Hmm.
It was the people who were very academic in their understanding of God. It was these, like you could, the names of these religious leaders were called the scribes, the Pharisees, the Sadducees, right? These people who they were career ministers. Um,
Hmm.
they went to seminary, right? They were
Yeah.
biblical scholars, um, and and they were denoted as these, people who were moral, who were virtuous, who were, Bible believing, Bible following, law and order people who, when they enter the room, you salute them, right? You give them a round of applause. They get the best seats in church. They they wear these nice clothes. You're supposed to admire them, right? And it was these people who were strongestly opposed to Jesus. In fact, Jesus was harshest to these people. Like the harshest words you find in the New Testament of Jesus talking to anyone are to these people. And so, yeah, it just to wrap this up is just that it starts with Jesus. Christianity starts and ends with Jesus. And if you have questions or doubts or even criticisms, get to know Jesus, get to know what he taught, how he lived, and what he was really all about. And I believe that all of your questions will be answered, and all of the doubts and moving parts in your mind that seem so complicated, that seem impossible to categorize, they will fall into their proper place when you see him and know him.
Thanks so much for listening to this episode. Be sure to follow the show on all of your favorite streaming platforms, and you can also watch new episodes released every week.